What's up guys, Antonio with Leader of the Pack Canine Training, and today we're going to talk about loose leash walking with your dog. We've got Cowboy today from A Home for Spa Animal Rescue, and he's going to be our demo dog to show you guys how to easily train your dog to walk nicely on a leash. The first thing to keep in mind, as always, is to make sure that you're having your dog wear a properly fitted collar that's fitted high up on the neck, just under the jawline, just behind the ears, and nice and snug. We want to make sure we have control over the dog when we are on our walk. Today we're going to be fitting Cowboy with a prong collar. Now I don't actually think Cowboy needs a prong collar in terms of teaching him to walk nicely on a leash, but the reason why I want to use a prong collar with him is to actually show you guys how to properly fit one and how to properly use one whenever you're going to teach a dog to walk nicely on a leash. Unfortunately, prong collars are often misused and have a bad reputation because of that misuse. So we want to make sure that the collar is fitted nice and snug, high up on the neck, and it's fairly tight. This way we can have control over the dog. And the first thing that we're going to do is actually introduce the prong collar to Cowboy to make sure that he's comfortable with it. If you notice here how I'm letting Cowboy move away from me and I provide gentle pressure to help him turn back towards me, and when he turns back towards me, I'll be rewarding him and petting him and praising him. I'm going to do this a few times just to make sure that he's comfortable with the pressure and understands that when he feels the pressure to not move away from it, but rather to come towards it. Now that we're ready to start our walk, one thing that is important to keep in mind is that walks start at the door. So whenever you're going to go on a walk with your dog, you want to make sure that you have control of them starting at the door. So we're going to put the dog in a sit, and the easiest way to do this is just to give them very gentle pressure up and back at a 45-degree angle. So pull up on the leash and slightly back at 45 degrees, and if necessary, you can go ahead and touch on their hindquarters just a little bit just to help put their butt down onto the ground. Now whenever I open the door, if they pop back up, I'm just going to put them right back into that sit and try again. I look at it like this: if I'm training my dog, I've got all day. So I want to make sure that I have enough time to walk my dog through this process and be consistent with this. So make sure that you have enough time for training. This way you're not rushing through the process and you're not getting impatient with your dog. Whenever Cowboy pops his butt up, notice how I gently and calmly put him back in a sit. I'm not saying anything, and this is important as well. There's nothing that needs to be said because Cowboy doesn't understand English. So I want to make sure that I'm communicating with him in a language that he understands, which is through physical pressure. So whenever he gets up, I gently and calmly put him back in a sit, and then I try again. And as soon as he can sit for a few seconds or to my liking, I'll go ahead and give him a release word like okay or let's go, and then we'll continue on our way outside. Now when we're outside, what's important to understand is you don't need a lot of room to actually teach your dog to walk with you on a leash. You only need about 15 to 20 feet of sidewalk or even driveway. So keep this in mind. You don't have to go all the way around the block. And when you go outside and you're working with your dog, remember that you are outside to train your dog. You're not outside to walk your dog for 30 minutes. You're not outside to walk your dog for 3 miles. You're outside to train your dog how to walk with you for those distances and those times later on in the future. But for now, it's all about training. So make sure that you have the right mindset when it comes to the training process. When you go outside, you're going to be dedicating this time to train your dog. The first thing we want to do is play the attention game. Simply put, this is where you're going to quickly change speed, change directions, and randomly stop and put your dog in a sit. This is the foundation of teaching your dog to walk nicely on a leash. If you want your dog to walk nicely and be mindful of you, you have to get them to actually pay attention to you, and this is the importance of the attention game. So you're going to be changing directions really quickly and changing speed. The whole point of this exercise is to be as random as possible, so you sort of force your dog to pay attention. Keep in mind though, when I change directions, that I'm not intentionally trying to hurt Cowboy or create too much pressure on the leash. I'm still being fairly gentle with him, and I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt and help him understand that he should pay attention to me. After a few times of turning around and randomly stopping, and I notice that Cowboy is paying attention to me, I'm going to start rewarding him and being a little bit more cheerful in my attempts to get him to walk alongside me. When I'm doing this, keep in mind that I really want to focus on rewarding him for the behaviors that I want. I want you guys to stay away from and avoid constantly saying no and correcting your dog. There will be a time for that later on, but in the beginning stages of learning, we want to make it as fun as possible and make it easy for the dog to understand. So if he becomes sidetracked at all, I'm going to make sure that I'm cheerfully calling him back to my side. Another thing that you want to do is use your hand as a beacon. So make sure that you're using your feeding hand or your left hand. For example, if you have the dog on your left side, you're going to be using your left hand to get your dog's attention. Another important thing to keep in mind is pick a side for your dog to be on. Most heeling positions are going to be on the left side, but it doesn't have to be that way. If you prefer your dog on your right, that's totally fine. But if you're going to have your dog on your left, and this is the position that we're going to use in the video, I'm going to be rewarding the dog with my left hand. So use your left hand as a beacon, as a means to keep your dog's attention. So you'll notice how every time I turn around, I put my hand out in an attempt to get his attention to my hand, and then I'll reward him for coming to my hand. Even if your dog is doing well, continue reinforcing your dog. So if they're food motivated, or even if they just like a good old pet on the head and a good boy, continue to do this. We want to make sure that we are rewarding the behaviors that we like. This is so very important. Another thing too that you want to keep in mind is to be as fun as possible. Don't turn it into a chore. Just like any other training, you want to make it fun for the dog. So when you turn around, cheerfully call the dog back to you and reward them through petting, praise, or delivery of food for doing the right thing. Really, really important things to keep in mind while you're walking your dog as well is you want to keep a loose leash. Typically I say you want to see a U shape or a J shape in the leash. This is very important because tension is communication. If there's too much tension on the leash, you may notice that your dog is starting to actually chew on the leash, or they're biting at it, or they're trying everything they can to get out of it. And the reason for that is because the tension doesn't go away. And what we want to help the dog understand is that whenever there is tension, that there's a reason for it. So when I stop and I put my dog in a sit, I'll use pressure and tension to help put their butt down to the ground. And as soon as their butt hits the ground, the tension goes away. The same thing happens if I turn around and my dog is at the other end of the leash, they feel tension. As soon as they start walking back towards me into position, the tension goes away. So another thing to keep in mind that's very, very important is to keep your hands at your side in a neutral position. Try to avoid sticking your arms out, your elbows out, or your hands up in the air like the Statue of Liberty. This is important because, again, the more tense you are and the more awkward you are, the more difficult it's going to be to train your dog. If you don't normally walk with your hand hanging off your side, sticking out like you're walking with a tray full of drinks, then don't walk that way with your dog. So last but certainly not least, we want to make sure that you're aware of the temperature of the ground. If you guys are walking your dogs in the winter or you're walking your dogs in the summer, be aware that your dog may be uncomfortable, and that might be the reason why they're trying to get away from you. Or if you're walking on a hot pavement and they keep going back and forth, instead of correcting them, touch the ground and see if this is a factor in why they're actually behaving this way. And I've seen many clients become frustrated with their dogs working with them, not realizing that the dog was actually very uncomfortable with their paws on the hot pavement or even the hot sidewalk. So keep this in mind when you're working with your dog, and double check and make sure that they're very comfortable and that this isn't an issue for your dog. If your dog is reactive towards other dogs, do everything you can to avoid other dogs for the time being. It's very important that you set your dog up for success and avoid putting them in situations where they're going to become overly reactive. Another thing that I highly recommend doing is working with your dog in the house. This is an easy way to help reinforce that walking next to you at your side is the best position for them to be in. So there's no distractions in your home. You don't have to worry about other dogs. You don't have to worry about grass. You don't have to worry about them wanting to pee on trees. Only thing you have to focus on is rewarding your dog for being at your side. While you're in your home, you can either train with or without a leash. Keep in mind though that if your dog becomes distracted in your house for whatever reason, don't turn it into a chore and don't be too focused on correcting them. There's always a time for that later on in the future when they become more proficient. In the meanwhile, what you really want to be focusing on is rewarding them for being in the right position, which is next to you.